Hello, welcome to this introductory video to the little book of Ruth in the Old Testament. It's only 4 chapters long, but it's a lovely short story. And one of the things that the Holy Spirit has done in the Old Testament is to bring together a whole collection of illustrations, of stories, of metaphors, about what God will one day do through the life and ministry and death of Jesus, which of course is described in the New Testament. And in Ruth, we have a picture of what redemption is. And it's a tragedy. Naomi is driven from her home by famine. And in the 10 years following, she loses her husband and then both her sons, and is left. She comes back to her hometown of Bethlehem with just one of her daughters-in-law, a woman called Ruth. And in the middle of this tragedy, and she says to her people, "Don't call me Naomi, call me bitter, because the Lord has made my life very bitter." But then things change, and Ruth begins to find a place in the community. And there's a man called Boaz who is actually very kind to both Naomi and to Ruth, and in due course marries Ruth, and Ruth becomes the great-grandmother of the greatest king of Israel, King David. And we see God's hand overruling in the story. The stories are told as a typical Jewish short story. There are 4 parts to it. It's also written in a way which is very feminine. It's very womanly. In fact, there's a great deal of discourse between the 2 women throughout the whole story. Some people think that the book was actually written by a female author, but there's also a good deal of ambiguity. To what extent did Ruth and Boaz come together sexually before they were married at the end of the story? And the answer to that question, in many ways it drives the whole story, but in another sense it's completely ambiguous. We simply don't know. There are pointers towards that. And so this lovely, beautiful story of redemption, where tragedy is transformed into an extraordinary place of honour, also leaves us with a whole number of questions. To what extent is God really involved in human life? He's clearly involved in the story, but there are questions about to what extent is it human beings working things out, and to what extent is God working through it? So, as you read this, think about these deep questions and see what Ruth has to say about all this.